friend, this is Mai with Creative Vibes, and today I want to talk about my why in advocacy. And to be completely honest with all of you, I didn't always feel this passionately about advocacy. Growing up, my life was consumed by trying to prove how different I was from any stereotype. I grew up as the only Japanese person in a primarily white neighborhood, and there were times where I made conscious decisions on how to live my life and how to act based on not being a stereotype. As I grew older and met more people like me, I realized that this is a pretty common experience for Asian Americans. How so many of us weren't given a chance to embrace ourselves because so many outside forces reinforced the idea that we should be ashamed of being different. When quarantine began, I was frankly very burnt out. And at that time, I was really grateful that everything was shut down because I didn't really have to think about anything. And so during that time, I started reading a lot. I was really determined to be more comfortable with my Asianness. So I read this book titled Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It totally blew my whole life open. I've never read anything that I actually related to, someone whose experiences paralleled mine rather than me trying to fit myself into someone else's experiences. And I want to read you a passage that resonated so clearly with me. In the popular imagination, Asian Americans inhabit a vague purgatorial status, not white enough nor black enough, distrusted by African Americans, ignored by whites, unless we're being used by the whites to keep the black man down. We are the carpenter ants of the service industry, the apparatchiks of the corporate world. We are math-crunching middle managers who keep the corporate wheels greased, but who never get promoted since we don't have the right face for leadership. We have a content problem. They think we have no inner resources. But while I may look impassive, I am frantically paddling my feet underwater, always overcompensating to hide my devouring feelings of inadequacy. As of 2017, suicide was the leading cause of death for Asian Americans aged 15 to 24. More than 2.9 million Asian Americans experienced some sort of mental health condition in 2019, yet are 3 times less likely to seek mental health treatment than any other racial group in the US, with some estimating Asian Americans are the least likely out of all racial groups to seek mental health treatment. Over 70% of Southeast Asian Americans who seek out mental health treatment are diagnosed with PTSD. And there are a lot of theories about about why this happens, how maybe Asian cultures stigmatize mental illness and they view it as a pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of mentality. How the model minority myth places pressure on Asian Americans to be uncomplicated and unproblematic. How there might be a lack of mental health education and mental illness is seen as a product of bad parenting. But something I don't hear a lot of is how the system is failing us. How the therapy profession is dominated by white people and the majority of interventions have been created by white people for white people. How hard it is for someone who prefers their native language to find a therapist who speaks it and is able to provide therapy in that language. How hard it is to find a therapist who is familiar with your culture, your heritage, and your history. How many stories I've heard of people giving up on finding a therapist who can work with them because their therapist dismissed their experiences or tried to place their idea of what's appropriate onto them. And that doesn't even begin to cover how Asian Americans have some of the greatest disparities in wealth and education, with Asian Americans at the bottom of this distribution largely being forgotten and tossed aside in these conversations. And here, again, we place the burden on the community instead of addressing the systemic issues in our healthcare system. You're not going to therapy because of your culture. You have a lack of mental health education. You stigmatize mental illness. It's your fault, not ours. It's your fault, not the system's. Health and wellness is political. Everything that happens in our outside world affects our internal experience. And it affects how we can show up in a client and therapist relationship. I mean, let's think about it. In your practicums, in your regular life, in your sessions, do you have times when you're preoccupied with something and it causes you to be less focused on what's right in front of you? So why do we expect differently from our clients or from ourselves as therapists? We can't call ourselves a blank slate therapist anymore. That I don't know if it was ever possible to begin with, because how can we build authentic and safe connections with our clients if we're not being fully honest with ourselves? Music therapy interventions are not going to help somebody who can't afford our services. They're not going to help someone whose anxiety and depression stems from food insecurity or lack of housing, low wages, drug policing, or the very real fear that they're going to be just another hate crime victim. Our interventions can only do so much. And addressing mental health and wellness goes way beyond having a good self-care practice or doing a group songwriting exercise. As human beings, we've all been born into society which is inherently ableist and patriarchal, racist, heterosexual, amongst many other things. And with that, we've been conditioned into holding potential harmful biases. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. But it is our responsibility to acknowledge these biases and how they could potentially cause harm. Because we can be both the oppressor and the oppressed at the same time. It's our responsibility as therapists to stand up for marginalized groups and to advocate to break down barriers that prevent people from accessing proper healthcare, education, housing, and food security. And that's why I'm an advocate, because no one deserves to feel ashamed about who they are. No one deserves to struggle because of systemic issues, because of oppression. No one deserves to struggle because of these issues. Thanks so much, y'all. Thanks for watching.